Good morning, everyone. So nice to see you. So, I am coming to you from the Pacific Northwest, and we are getting a snow dump today. I love snow, so I don't even mind shoveling the driveway. I thought you guys might like to see this. This was yesterday's project, and I know it won't show up super well on the camera, but it is a finished quilt. It is bound, it is done. I am a machine binder, and I bound it in this cute little black and white diagonal 1/8 inch stripe. Yeah, so it is totally finished. So I did post some pictures of that on Instagram yesterday. It didn't have the binding on yet. I'll maybe put one or two of those up this morning. But if you happen to miss yesterday's episode, I was quilting this super cute little pumpkin quilt with a kind of feathery, pretty traditional quilting design. So let me just toss that out of the way, just like that. Today I have kind of a treat for you. I've been rummaging through my unfinished objects of my own projects and thinking, what do I want to quilt? And I have a vintage top that we're going to work on today. So I acquire these in various means, sometimes at garage sales, sometimes they're given to me. This one I think was given to me by a friend. Um, and I really like to finish vintage tops. They have usually a few challenges with them because they're often hand pieced and things like that. But it's so rewarding to finally finish a quilt that someone that I don't know began long ago. And usually I give them away when they're finished. So I quilt them, bind them, pass them on. And they're often lap sized or smaller, and they just make awesome gifts. And I think it's just so special. So that's what we're going to work on today. Let's get started. Oh, and I forgot to mention too, even my backing is vintage. My head's not really in the picture, Dave. Do we care? Oh, okay. That's fine. That's fine. This I did get at a garage sale. It was kind of a crafty garage sale, but she had quite a few flat sheets. Well, she had quite a few all kinds of sheets. I chose the flat ones. And I love to use sheets for backings. The older sheets, particularly, and I would say mine date probably to about the 70s. Quite a few of the others I got were prints, so you can kind of tell by the colors in the prints. They're probably early 70s, somewhere in there. And they are usually thinner and a less tight weave. So a 600 or 800 thread count sheet is not a good idea for a backing because you pierce it with the needle a bajillion times and you're apt to cut those fibers. But the cheaper, less, poorer quality quilts, sheets make great backing. So that's what I'm using today is this vintage sheet because I think it kind of carries on the theme. So let's make sure I get it right side up, although it is a woven. I don't think it matters, but just in case. So I have not undone the hems or anything on the sheet. It's plenty large. So I'm just going to trim them off afterwards. Why make work for myself, right? So let's just get this more or less centered in our workspace for today. And we'll start loading. And I'm going to load it just below the hem just for the ease of putting the red snappers on. Loading with that double thickness fabric is not quite as easy. Try and get this straight. So I'd love to know where you guys are chiming in from this morning. Are you having a snow day too, or are you living somewhere where it's warm? In which case, we're a little bit jealous, but not much, because I do love the snow. You will probably hear snow blowers throughout the morning in the microphone. Our neighbors and we live in a complex where they clear the sidewalks, and so that's often a bit noisy in the mornings. Dave trying to show you the snowfall. He says it doesn't look like much. I hear him kind of chuckling at himself behind me. So I'm seeing something in loading this backing, which I did not notice before, and that is that it has selvage on both sides and it's pulling tight. So I'm just going to run along with my scissors every 6 or 7 inches and clip that 1/4 inch because it's pulling quite a lot. And since I know I have a ton of excess fabric, and I know I'm not going to use the scraps to make quilts because it's not really good quality fabric, I'm not going to worry about the slight fabric wastage. I'm just going to get it done. So while I'm doing this, if you have any quilty friends that you think might be interested in this, I'll be quite honest, I'm trying to build a following. And so I would appreciate if you're interested, if you would share this video. I think on your mobile devices anyway, it's lower left, it's right near the comments. There's a little share and an arrow. And share it with friends you think might be interested or benefit. All right. And also we've been loading the replays on YouTube so that you're actually able to go back and rewatch these. So we've done the first 2 days already, and this one will be up tomorrow. So basically by next day, you'll start seeing the replays on YouTube. So someone's here from Richland, apparently. Is that Richland, BC? No, Richland. I'm thinking, yeah. Sorry about that. My mistake. We're getting a bird's eye view here out my window. By the way, there's well, I wouldn't say an 18-wheeler, but a flat deck truck. There you go, stuck right outside our window. So if we look a little distracted from time to time, you'll know why. And I pulled my backing just a little too far. So I'm going to back it up a bunch again and then roll a little more. The point of rolling it this way is to get an even tension all the way across the backing so that you're loading it straight in terms of grain. And so if I over pull it, then I back it way up. I hope that's making sense, but you can see what I'm doing, so I won't bore you with explanations too much. Did I put my red snappers on that side, Dave, already? I can't see. Oh, someone from Edmonton, Alberta. So I am a Canadian, by the way. Edmonton is awfully close to our old stomping grounds. I grew up in Fort St. John, BC, which, if any of you have traveled the Alaska Highway, is about 50 miles from the south end of the Alaska Highway. And we joke that we moved to the inland Northwest for the warmer weather. And you may laugh, but it is true, and the lady who's here from Edmonton knows I speak truth. It is cold country up there in the winter. Alrighty. So when you do have questions, feel free to type them into the comments. It makes it easier for us if you put a capital Q in front of them. Facebook does not always arrange them chronologically, so when we go back to read them and answer them, it catches our eye a little better if you put a big Q on there. So I'm just making a judgment call here. The quilt is a little bit, the backing is a little bit discolored right here, and I know that I have tons of fabric in length. So I'm just going to roll a bit of that up and start my quilt a bit lower down. My friend Eva is saying, yep, she's having a snow day in Reardon, Washington, which is a little west of me. She teaches in a school there. Yeah, snow day is a good thing. More time for quilting. So I'm doing something different today, but it might be of interest to you. Because I don't have my little red snapper for a straight line guideline at the top of my quilt, I'm actually going to run a basting stitch across with just my batting on, just so that I have a straight line to work with. Now this works for me again because I have the channel lock, which I talked a bit about in my basting yesterday or the day before. I honestly can't recall. But because I can lock my machine in perfectly straight, I can then create a nice straight line to line up the top of my quilt. Yeah, take that off. So I very much doubt that that is visible on camera, but I've just got a stitched little line across the top now. Okay, and now you get to see the quilt. What? Okay. All right, so here is our vintage quilt. This is partially hand-pieced. Most of the leaves are hand-pieced, so I wonder if it was not made by two different people, because the leaves are hand-pieced and the rest is machine stitched in a different thread. Some of it is stitched with white, some of it is stitched with red. This is the beauty of working with vintage stuff. You kind of work with the hand you're dealt, so to speak. And nothing is straight or flat on it. Yep, sure can, Dave. Nothing is straight or flat on it, so you will get to see me, doing some remedial stuff as we go today. You can see things like this. And I don't usually worry about trying to press it, especially this quilt, because it's not straight or flat. So I don't worry about trying to fix that beforehand. I'm just going to quilt it and get it done. That's my method. You certainly could press it. You could, do cleaning techniques on it, whatever. I'm just going to quilt it and wash it afterwards and get my crinkly texture then. So back to the beginning. And there's lots of loose threads and things. So I'll just be working with that as I go. Oh, just when my backing is rolled on here, usually I'm seeing the red snapper in a straight line across here, and that's my eye uses that as a visual guide to line up my quilt. And I do still have this roller as a guide. It's just 5 inches away, where my red snapper is usually right there where I'm working for a nice straight line. I'm all about sort of good enough is close enough, so I eyeball those straight lines. You could always stitch this little basting guideline. I don't. I eyeball it. Why am I not pulling forward very far? Because of my snapper, that's why. So today I will probably stitch in regulated mode because the quilt is so irregular, and I'm probably going to have to use my left hand a lot of times to manipulate it, so I don't want it to be racing out in front of me. I'm going to tighten my one more notch. There we go. Now here again, I don't know that you can see on camera. The line of this quilt on the side is not very straight. So I have a couple choices. I can make that border really straight and work in all the fullness in the quilt, or I can not worry too much about having a perfectly square quilt when I'm finished. And that is the option I choose because I think it's not going to be square no matter how hard I try. So I'm just going to make it as even as I can, and I'm not going to sweat the small stuff. So I'm just winging this. I'm just guiding my machine. I do not have a channel lock on. And I'm just going to start on this side because I'm here. And why go all the way back to the other side? Sip of coffee while I'm over here. Ready to go. The pattern I'm using today, obviously it's an all over. We're doing edge to edge quilts. It's a take on Angela Walters' Hook and Swirl. This is certainly not one of my own designs, and if you want to see it in more detail, Google Angela Walters Hook and Swirl. She's got a nice instructional video for it. And you probably saw there I got a little pleat. Can you see it on camera now, Dave? Okay, I'll come back to it. And there certainly are pleats in this sewing. As best I can, I'll even them out with my left hand. Otherwise, I'm going to just stitch them down wherever they are. We were talking yesterday a little bit about how to choose designs. And this quilt is a good example of thinking through the problems that you've got to work with and letting that influence your design choice. I would not pick something on this quilt that had any type of straight line quilting because it will push all this excess fabric that is everywhere out in front of you and be hard to deal with. Much, much easier to use something with circles like this one has, because quilting around a circle pulls in excess fabric. So I purposely chose something that is nothing but curves, basically, for this quilt. You can see. I just have an eggshell on today. Slightly off-white, which is what the color of this background is. And again, with this quilting design, I'll just use the echo quality to move around whenever I need to. just do another echoing curve to get wherever it is that I think I need to go. And this is a 50 weight thread. I've got exactly the same thread top and bottom today. The spacing of my lines is roughly 1/2 inch apart. Maybe a bit generous, a bit more than that. I think that's sufficient quilting to hold everything in place and maybe even reinforce this rather fragile quilt top, while at the same time I'm not trying to do anything on a fussy level, because this quilt just... fussy is not what it is. You may or may not be able to see where I'm quilting that there is some discoloration, not to say dirt, and it's quite visible on the lighter colored fabrics. And I opted, again, because of the level of fragility, I opted not to wash it before I started quilting it. I think it does need a good washing, and I will do that after it's quilted and everything's reinforced and held in place. And I'll just wash it on a super gentle cycle with a super gentle cleaner, and I will lay it flat on the floor to dry. And that's my idea of gentle but not too fussy care for a vintage quilt. I don't know what the age of this quilt top would be. I would say some of the prints, like this yellow one right here, looks 50s vintage, and I've just run out of bobbin thread, so I'm just going to pause there and back up to my last corner. Yeah, it's hard to know, and I'm certainly no textile expert, but my guess is most of these fabrics are from the 50s, maybe even before. And I say that only because there's a lot of quote unquote red in the quilt, but there's not very much true red. And you had a lot more of this turkey red, I feel like, in the 50s. But again, I am not an expert as to textiles by any means, so don't quote me on that, okay? Okay, yeah, let's have a question while I'm doing this. Question is, Jody, I noticed you're using the clamps differently today than before. I've seen you clamp directly to the backing, but today you're clamping to a string. What is the reasoning for each method? Oh, you'll laugh at this one, Jody. The reason for the string is that's my preferred method, is this one on this side. Yeah, here. Just have the long clamp that holds evenly across about 16 inches. But my matching clamp broke, and I ordered a replacement set, and they're different, and they're not working well for me. So on the other end, I've just got a pinch hitting method, which is a clamp, two little clamps pulling on the backing fabric. Not my favorite way because you're apt to get, pullage right at each clamp and get a bit of scalloping going on. So I just have them kind of on the loose side. So, yeah, no real science there. That's just making do. So as I mentioned yesterday, I do fill my own bobbins. You'll see how long this takes to pull off my last full bobbin off my winder and start the next one. That's how long I invest into winding my own bobbins. Not very long. I'm just going to take a minute and collect some of these threads that are hanging around on the quilt top here. I'm very careful when I do that, by the way, to not pull on what seems like a sewing thread, or you're apt to undo the seam, right? So when it's fibers of the fabrics, I'll just pull them out. But when I think it might be a sewing thread, I actually take the time to trim it. I wouldn't be surprised in the course of this, we do find a seam or two that is coming loose. And if so, I'll show you what I do there. That looks pretty good. Alrighty. And usually I drop my seam ripper or my scissors right where I left, because if you've got a busy print, it can be tricky to find where you left off. Let's trim the threads. I'm going to pause for a minute and adjust my tension or have a look at my bobbin. I'm going to at least reload it because I can see that my tension is not what I would like it to be. I can't quite reach under there, so I'm just going to take a moment to reload my bobbin. Sometimes that is all it takes to fix it. Of all my favorite colors, I do, and I have about 20 favorite colors that I use regularly. So yes, that is ideal, is to have another cone to leave on the bobbin winder. If I don't, and that is sometimes the case, I'll bring in a color just for a quilt or something like that. Then I just try and wind them in advance. But even so, I don't invest a ton of time into doing it. I'll just, while I'm doing other things, I'll just feed through however many bobbins. And it doesn't take very long of quilting before you can estimate pretty closely how many bobbins you'll need. Much better. So yesterday I was talking about my upcoming master class and some of the things that I'll be teaching in that. And one of the things that comes with the master class is a couple of bonus modules. And the one bonus module is I've collected all my tips for troubleshooting things like you just saw. When the stitch formation is not quite right, it might be tension, it might be any number of things. And basically, they're not original ideas in that module. They're just my collection of all the things I've found that I should go check. And top of the list would be just reload the bobbin. Sometimes that's all it takes. You've just not pulled it correctly, tightly into the thread guides in some way. So I should talk a little bit about that masterclass while I'm quilting. That's kind of the purpose of these lives, is to introduce myself a little bit as a quilter and to tell you what that's about, aside from giving you the bird's eye view of quilting. Freehand quilting is my specialty, if you will. It is certainly my love and my passion. And I want to make that reachable for other people. It can be really intimidating to some people, the idea of just launching out without any pre-marking or planning. Just where do you go next? And I want to show how easy that can be. And so the masterclass is divided up into 6 modules. Each of them has a certain amount of what I call theory. So teaching about breaking down a design into its parts and discussing the various elements that you can change and ways to change and thread choices and pattern cues and all those things. And then each module goes into kind of a family of designs, which I demonstrate on Lucy, on my quilting machine. And it's a much closer up look at the quilting, like the actual design formation, than you're seeing in these lives. These lives, I'm very much just giving you a bird's eye view of the process. But in the master class, it's all about how to form the actual design. So there are 6 modules. They're delivered one each week, starting January 11. But the truth of the matter is they're accessible to you anytime, all the time, and forever. So you can process through them at your own speed. If you want to spend 2 weeks on each one, be my guest. If you want to spend a month on each one, or 2 days on each one, that's totally up to you. The only thing that is affected by that 6-week time frame is that I'm doing a number of live things throughout the course of that masterclass while it's being delivered. So there are a number of sessions live on Facebook where we have questions and answers, and I'm at my machine and you can be at yours, and we can do some troubleshooting and some talking about things that are giving you grief. I'm also opening a private Facebook group for all the students in there so they can share with each other and pictures and questions and hints and all those things. And I'll be publishing live office hours, if you will, where I'll be online. And so in real time, you can pop online with your questions or comments or pictures or whatever. We want to cheer each other on, right? So I really hope that people will be active in that Facebook group and share their progress and the things that they've done. I think I can safely promise that anyone who comes through that masterclass and is willing to practice probably 5 days a week, 4 or 5 days a week, as little as even 20 minutes, will see significant progress in their freehand quilting over a 6 or 8 week time frame. So that's my goal, is to make freehand edge-to-edge quilting like this accessible and to show how gorgeous it can be. Yes? We're just looking at your favorite colors to work with. Oh, I like the navy red gray combination. Great idea. Is Orphil's a brand of thread? I'm sorry, I can't read the screen, so I'm just going on what Dave's telling me. It's very tiny to read. Where am I? I'm basting. The edge of this quilt is definitely a torn edge of fabric, which is not the end of the world. You know it's on a straighter grain at that point, don't you? I don't know that I have a favorite color to work with. It changes from time to time. I used to say my favorite color was green. Now I think my favorite color to work with in quilts is red, and yet when I look back at my photographs, I don't see a lot of red quilts, so I don't even know what the answer is. Black. That's an interesting choice. Oh, wobbly line there. Let's try and make that a little straighter. Okay, something's in the way, Dave. There must be a wire there. I'm actually going to undo a bit of basting. Can you guys believe it? Bear with me half a second. Every so often that happens, and it can sometimes be as simple as a thread that has fallen into your what am I saying, Dave? Your glides. And you can feel it right away. There's just resistance. So we'll put our lock on so that we get a straight line going on there. Certainly some of this I will take up when I bind it. I would happily take your feedback. What do you think I should bind this with? Because of course I have nothing that remotely matches any of these fabrics. What do you think I should bind a quilt like this in? Yeah, let's have a question. Go for it. Okay, Kathy, are there any printed materials included with the master class? Not really. I do have a number of slide decks, if you will, so screens with pointers, so almost like notes, and those are accessible all the time to you, and you probably could find a way to print them out. They're PDFs. I don't offer, there's not like a workbook, right? So it's just those kind of point form notes, and then you would need something to doodle on to practice on. Lots and lots of video, that's right. So I put this pin in here last night because I knew this would come in handy today. There is a little seam here. Let me pull my machine over so you can see close up. There is a little seam here that is coming undone, and I saw that last night as I was working with this. This is a very small one. Often there are bigger ones. But what I would do with this, and I do encounter them even on client quilts from time to time, but usually I just make sure that it is, the fold of the upper fabric is well over the one underneath it. And then I usually will put a pin in it so that that is held securely where it needs to be. And I will quilt over it to hold it in place. And then, let me just see if I can reach it here. I had it ready. Whether this is a client quilt or my own, I'm going to want to come back and reinforce that with some hand stitching afterwards. So I'll put a safety pin in after I'm done, and I'll tie. I usually just grab a selvage out of my stash somewhere, right? And I'll just tie this on to the spot where that is so that it's easily findable. So you'll see me do that as we go. Because occasionally you do find stuff like that in a quilt as you're working, and you don't want to take it off the machine and try and fix it, and sometimes that's impossible. So I just quilt it in place and mark the location and come back and do some hand stitching there. That's going to be our plan. Now, which side was I on? This one. So once again, this design is kind of my own personalization of Angela Walters's hook and swirl design. So if you want a real breakdown of how to quilt this, she's got a tutorial on YouTube. Hook and swirl. And I'm aiming for, I don't know, a 1/2 to 5/8 inch spacing for the most part between my lines. It certainly goes as large as an inch in many places. But you'll see when I'm done. Overall, it'll make a pretty good texture. I just remembered. Oh, I did put my magnetic bars on. There you go. I'm losing my mind here. I was thinking I had not put those on, and I find those very critical to keep the center of the quilt from pulling up as I'm quilting across it. They're super helpful. Once again, I'm going to take just a moment and get some of the loose threads off. I should have done that before I started my pass. This one's not... Oh, okay. Question? Are you putting that little horn just wherever, like if you need to fill an empty space? Oh, it's not that specific. No, I am actually just tucking it in wherever I think a space should be. So where I'm sitting right now, I could either do it right back up into here, I could do it into this side, I could come all the way around and do it way over on this side, whatever. Seriously, watch Angela Walters' video. She's so great at explaining to begin with. And, you know, I would have to say from her, I learned my whole philosophy that done is better than perfect, right? I'm sure you guys have heard her say that if you've watched her at all. I'm sorry I missed that, Dave. Oh, okay. There you go. Dave's putting a link, making it super easy for you. I'm sure he's putting up links as well. They may be scrolling across the bottom of the screen at times throughout the class to my masterclass, and specifically to the syllabus or the curriculum. If you want to know exactly what's in it, I've got it laid out in there like by module, so you can see what each module kind of covers and get an idea of the designs that are in it. And a few of you that have been watching the last couple days are enrolled in that class. And just for your peace of mind, the first design that I did with the kind of parallel lines, that one is in the master class, but none of these others are. I want you to feel like you're still getting your money's worth out of that class, right? That I'm not giving away all that information beforehand. So this one is not in that class. The one I did yesterday is not in the class. These are just brand new designs for those of you that are watching live. Fresh content is the idea. And I'm curious if anyone had a chance or was interested in looking at my Pinterest page and has any requests for a design tomorrow. I know which quilt I'm going to work on, but I haven't for sure decided which design I'm going to quilt on it. So if you have a request, this would be a great time, really any time today, to type it into the comments. Here again, I think you can see this. The seam, it's not coming undone here, but the stitches are just loose. It was hand stitched in that area. So I'm just going to make sure that I go over that well with my quilting. You see that? I've kind of passed over it twice. So I am very much making this design fit where I want to go and where I want stitching to fall to reinforce my little quilt top. So here's my pin. This is small enough I think I can take the pin out. Usually I would leave the pin right in there to be sure that was in place, but I want to do a big swirl down here, right? And it's going to get in my way. So I'm just going to watch and do it carefully. And I'm going to take that pin out. And I'm going to stitch right across that area. Like so. And then I will go back with my trusty marker and put it in there so that I know to come back after the quilt is finished and do some reinforcing there by hand. Selvages are good for something. Look at that. Here, I've got a bunch of fibers. Let's just try and pull some of those out before we stitch them down repeatedly. There we go. Nice and neat. And there I got a little pleat, as you see. And you know what? I am so not worrying about that. And by the way, I was chatting with my friend Eva yesterday, who I think is watching right now. And it was her idea to do this hook and swirl design. So thanks for that great idea, Eva. It's a great choice for this quilt. And there we are at the edge again. don't think I can quite do it in 2 more passes. It's going to be 2 and a bit. So with this quilt, because it is so wonky, I can't really use that for my guideline to keep it straight. So from this side, because it's floating and hanging down, I'm keeping a weather eye on how straight that bottom edge is, and it's not going to be perfect, but I wouldn't let it, get a big old frown in there or a big old smile. I'm keeping an eye on that so that when I come to the end, it'll be straightish. That looks pretty good. Lots and lots and lots of fabric threads hanging on this one. Lots and lots. Oh, there's a sewing thread. You see, I'm not going to pull on that. I'd be afraid of undoing something, so I'll just trim that little one off. I think the rest looks okay. There we go. Well, good. The feeling's mutual, Eva. So I live in Spokane, Washington, and we do have a thriving quilting community here, and that is for sure. And I really appreciated it when I first started longarm quilting. I've had my machine for over 5 years, not yet 6. But very soon after I got it, within a couple of months, I realized that there was actually a machine quilting guild in Spokane, and I know there are not all that many across the U.S. And not only that, but there was over 100 people in it. So I got a chance early on to meet a lot of other quilters, and back in the days when we could have meetings, we got together not super frequently, but 4 or 5 times a year. And one of the things that the guild did was we would break apart into kind of small groups for a little bit of icebreaker chat at some point in our guild meetings. And we would break apart by machine brand. And so I had such a great opportunity to talk to other ladies that have a Gamble machine. And Eva, who's been chatting here, that is where we first met. And we've just become good friends since then. We met over quilting. I sure appreciated that, though. There is just so much value in being able to have someone of whom you can ask the simplest questions, because I'm sure I've said this before already in these live quilting sessions, but longarm quilting is, by its very nature, solitary. You're working in your own studio, and you're not working with anybody else, and you don't get to sort of see how they do things and learn kind of by osmosis. And so you need a forum in which to ask your questions, I feel like. So I was fortunate enough to have the guild. I know lots of you don't have something like that nearby you, so hopefully I can provide a little bit of that community, both in my live sessions and in my Facebook groups. So as I mentioned, I am initiating a private one for the masterclass, but I also have a
my own group, which is Stitched by Susan, and I have one for my patterns. So really in any of those or on any of the social media, I'm pretty available. And I am happy to answer questions. I just felt like these live videos were maybe a way that I didn't have to organize a class necessarily or devise curriculum necessarily, right? I could just quilt in front of you and you could just watch and glean what you can from it. And there's a pleat, which I'm just going to stitch right in. Because it's on the stripe, I don't honestly think anybody will ever notice that. It's a whole pleat from here to here. You see that? We've just stitched it in. Nobody will be any the wiser. Some of these cream-colored fabrics, the neutral, are definitely flower sacking. Some of them are definitely a very, very, very thin muslin. Here again is a tiny example of where this seam is not really coming apart, but you can see the threads are loose. Oh, look at that. It is coming apart a little bit. Well, I don't have another selvage prepared for this, and I'm not going to walk off camera, but I'm just going to put a pin in there so that I know to come back to that place and reinforce that a little bit, because that will just continue to undo, right? So I'll get in there and do some hand stitching and just really reinforce that. My original point was that I attempted to stitch across in that area to hold everything concise there, right? Newsflash, by the way, the truck that was parked in front of my window and stuck is now gone. He figured it out. We live on a bit of a hill, and he just could not make that incline. And there I'm going to do just a swirl. I didn't feel like I had room to put in a whole big motif. So my choices were either do one in a smaller size or do something different. And I chose something slightly different but complementary. For those who may just be coming in, I'll mention again, yesterday I was doing my edge to edge with the stitch regulator off. I just had my stitching in constant speed. Today I've opted to keep the stitch regulator on because I'm dealing with so many irregularities and I'm so often wanting to pause or to slow down to deal with a pleat or those sorts of things. So in that case, I find it helpful to have the stitch regulator on so that I never inadvertently stitch something down. I don't want to have to spend time going back and undoing. So there's a place for each thing. And you know, if you didn't have a stitch regulator, then I would just advise slowing it down, your constant speed, to work with this. It'll take a little longer overall to do the quilt, but less time than if you have to redo things. So big pleat there again. I am such a fan of edge-to-edge quilting. Just in case that's not a term you're familiar with, it just means quilting from edge to edge of the quilt using the same design. No thread changes, no stopping and starting for seams or blocks or borders. Sometimes called all-over quilting, means exactly the same thing. I just feel like it adds texture and interest to a quilt without overwhelming the quilt itself. Because quilting is my business, I'm so often quilting for other people. And so I don't want to overshadow at all their choices of fabrics or quilt pattern. I want my quilting to be just complementary, and I find edge to edge to do that. And I'll be honest with you, I very frequently will advise my clients against custom quilting. You know, they'll come with, recently I did a quilt for a college graduate, and her grandmother was making it. And in her mind, she's thinking, this is a special quilt. I want to do the very best thing for my college graduate, right? I don't want to be skimpy. I don't want to cheap out on her. And yet, I did not feel like custom quilting really advanced the quilt, right? It was quite a busy print. It would get lost in it. And it would certainly be expensive for the grandmother. So I talked her into, and I didn't go against her wishes by any means, but I suggested to her that we do something special in the center of a quilt. It was kind of medallion style. So we did something special in the center, and then we just filled in all around it. Actually, with the edge-to-edge design I did yesterday. And it looked so, so pretty. And what that does is just adds that lovely texture on a quilt where you can't really see the quilting anyways. Oh, my silly thing. Computers can be such a pain. Hang on. Just let me refresh a second. Okay, now Dave's telling me he gave me 2 angry emojis for trying to mute his iPad, and I'm saying, you know, those are going to show up forever. That's so funny. Well, I don't really want to get on my soapbox, but I just truly do think an edge-to-edge design so often is the best complement to a quilt. And, of course, it is economical. And so, yay for the person who's having the quilt done. They can afford to do more now. That's how I look at it. I'm not necessarily a fan of things that are pictorial, I guess you would say, like, you know, baseball glove and bat and those sorts of things, because my goal is usually to provide even texture across. I remember years ago, long before I had a long arm, but was making quilts. I took a quilt to a long armor, and it was for my son who loves playing chess. And so it was kind of a basic quilt pattern, but I had chess pieces quilted on it because I thought, you know, that's cool. That's meaningful to him. That's his hobby, whatever. And it's true, it was. But in truth, it was completely lost on the quilt top and did not make it any prettier or make it look any better. I would have been as far ahead to just have texture quilted on it. But, you know, live and learn. So that's kind of how I formed my philosophy, is by doing the other way. And I just don't see that high-end custom quilting is the answer for a lot of quilts either. But that is just my opinion. But everyone's entitled to my opinion, right? So, my quilt edge is not straight, not surprisingly. But it's not awful. This corner, I'm not sure what camera view Dave's got on, but this corner has quite a bit of excess. It didn't here, but it does down here. So I'm going to lift that up a little bit, and I'm going to try and ease as much as I can of that into this area. I am going to offer a bonus module that's called Dealing with Problem Quilts. And that is certainly various permutations of quilts that are not flat will figure largely in that problem quilt module. You know, ones that aren't square, ones that have wavy borders or have tight borders, ones that have uber thick seam allowances. You know, there's not a magic fix, but I do have solutions I've learned over working with those quilts over the years to offer. So let's just see what we can do here. It looks like this block was large. It's both wide and long. So we're going to try and pull some of that excess in. And you'll see as I go why a curvy design is advantageous here. So you can see that I've really pulled that up with my basting. You can see all that excess fabric, and I think I'll be able to work that in. However, we are going to start at the other end. I'm sorry, Dave? Yeah, there's pleats everywhere. If that's the first one you've seen, count yourself lucky. There are dozens of pleats in this little quilt, and we're just going to let them be. Happy little pleats, as Bob Ross would say. Alrighty. And look, you can see some basting threads in there too. But again, I'm just leaving it be. I don't know, does the camera? You can't really see a good view of how unsquare that purple leaf is. Like, check out the seam right here. And you know what? It doesn't matter. When it's all done, it's going to be a lovely lap quilt. This design, by the way, is a good one for practicing your round circles on. I very much remember in my early on days of quilting, I think I probably quilted faster in my first year in some ways than I quilt now. But I kind of used centrifugal force and I kind of flung my machine around circles, you know. And that does to some extent help to make it go around. However, it means you don't have very much control of it either. That's not a great fix, but it'll do. So I encourage you to really focus on these circles and go slow enough that it's you driving in the round circle and not just the centrifugal force of your machine going around. That will only take you so far. At some point, you've actually got to take control. Oh, that's a bit much. Okay, I confess I am backing up for one. Because that pleat faces away from me, I didn't see how deep it really was. I will do that again and manage it a little better. And all I'm going to do is go back to my last corner, which is up here. So this is completely personal preference, how much tolerance you have for imperfections. There's better ways to undo than this, but it's difficult when I've got my machine in the way and yeah, I'm just getting it done. It isn't pretty, but it's getting done. You can see that pleat. That's a good 1/4 inch folded over right there. I'll give you a better look. There's a big old pleat there, which is fine. We're just going to stitch it down. But I may see if I can turn around and cross it from the other direction the first time, so that I'm stitching the pleat down instead of my hopper foot trying to pick it up on the way past, if that makes sense. So all I'm going to do is reverse the angle of my circle so that I'm coming across this direction, and that will stitch it down. At some point I still will have to cross back over, and that one is so big that I actually think I'm going to put a couple pins in it. There you go. Can you see that? See if I can't manage to stitch this in place. All right. A few stitches to lock it. So let's go across this way. I still have to go back over, but since I've got it pinned now, I think that I'll be okay. Take one pin out. So I've kind of lost my rhythm of my diagonal motion across the quilt top, but I'm not going to worry about it. I'll fill in the places as we go. So here again, now I'm going to be going across the pleat in the easiest possible direction. Much better. Uh-oh. Well, let's just get that in place. I did say this was all about real quilting, didn't I? No edits here. This is exactly what it looks like. And I think we can all agree that that is not a thing of beauty. However, that is a block that is seriously distorted. I just think that's the best we're going to get from it. And now I'm just going to echo my way back to where I would like to be quilting, which is way up here. There we are. And off we go again. Take off a few threads here. I'm seeing it. Oh, we're out of bobbin thread again. I'm seeing as I go that some of the stems, like this one where I am right now, were machine stitched down, and most of them were hand stitched down. So another reason why I think Possibly there were 2 women that worked on this quilt. I'm going to go back a little further just because I'm on this dark fabric, and my reinforcing stitches when I begin is going to show up so much. So I'm just going to go back till I'm into the green. Shows up much less there. Usually I would go to a corner. In this case, I'm going to go to a color where it does not show as much. Right there. So I don't tie and bury my threads generally on an edge to edge. I will just stitch over it about 1/2 inch and reinforce the stitches. And you see I'm leaving my little scissors lay there to mark the spot because it's difficult to see. And once again, I'm just taking a moment to set another bobbin up on my independent winder and get it going. Don't, Dave. Okay. So all I have, it's across the room, which I can't really show you in camera, but I just have my thread shelf over there, and I have my bobbin winder and a pair of scissors there handy. Okay. X marks the spot, or a scissors marks the spot. So I'll just overlap the stitching. Oh, a good 1/4 inch, maybe closer to 1/2. And put a few reinforcing stitches in, and I'm on my way. So I'm going to put an idea out there, and would you guys chime in on this today and see what you think of it? Next week I'm going to be working on a quilt, also my own, and it's really, really pretty. It's a lone star, and I got just the star itself from the same garage sale where I got this backing, and I've appliqued it onto a solid background, and I'm going to custom quilt it, so it's a solid cream colored background. Would that be of interest to you if I set up some more live sessions like this? And there will probably be even less talking, really not much instructional value. I'll just basically have the camera on and be stitching. Would that be helpful to just watch how I do that? Because it would probably be a couple-hour segment over several days. It will be a much longer project, obviously, because it's custom quilting than these. So let me know what you think. Because this is fairly easy to set up. My dear husband, once he gets all the cameras and wires and things set up, it's fairly easy to do. So once again, a shout out to my husband Dave, who is the guy behind all these cameras. We have, I think, 3 going today. And he sits at his desk the whole time I do this and, you know, goes from view to view and makes sure we have sound and all that stuff. And I sure appreciate it because this is not something I could do on my own. So shout out to Dave. So now we're coming into this area where I have all this excess fabric. So we'll see how it goes. Sometimes it goes better than others. I forgot to put my clip on the side. Let's do that so we've got a little bit of tension on it. There was a question? Oh, okay. Someone would love to see the custom quilting? So basically, I don't even know that I would wear a mic. I would just be on camera, just doing it. And you would just get to basically watch over my shoulder. Where do I want to go next? One of the difficulties that I'm facing is this yellow block. I don't think it has fusible facing on the back of it, but it's crisp. So it's not wrinkling up like it should. So basically, this is going to stay flat because I can't get it to, you can see that there. It's just pushing. This is perfectly flat. So I'll just do the best I can. That's all one can do, right? Now I do see a problem here. I'm not sure if it's in camera. Oh, it's hard to tell. Oh, it's actually not coming undone. So I was worried that this seam is coming undone, and it's not, but this yellow fabric over top, and even the white down here was laid on top of another fabric, and there's a whole raw edge showing there. So I'm just going to make sure that I quilt it down well. I don't know that there's any way to really fix that. Probably the lifespan of this quilt is limited. There's a number of places I'm seeing on this yellow block where raw edges are showing through, and it's just been clapped on top of another piece of fabric. So, once again, we're making what we can of it. And I'm going to make my motifs just a little bit smaller here. And I'll put a swirl in there. That's all that will fit. See there, we've got some raw edges going on. I don't know if you can hear in my needle. I can. It's just puncturing through this yellow, whatever it is. It is thick and sort of unyielding. Does not want to be gathered in very much at all. So I've got quite a few lines of stitching crossing that raw area. We'll see. The seam is not going to come undone. Just over some washings, you're going to get a little fraying going on there, but it is what it is. Once again, right there, you can see I've got raw edge showing. I just made sure to stitch right over it. Hold it down as best I can. And I'm apt to get a pleat or two in here. I'll do my best. Oh, not too bad. Not too bad. And there I'll just put a swirl in because I don't think I can fit an entire hook and swirl. I'll just come back up to the edge. There we go. Okay, we just have one slim pass left and then we are finished. So it's looking not too bad. You can see it, by and large, lays flat when all is said and done. Has anybody given us any feedback, Dave, on suggestions for what to bind this with? Like I think the black and white that I used on my little pumpkin quilt, though I absolutely love a black and white binding, I think is a little stark. So yeah, I would love to hear from you guys if you have an idea for a color I should go to bind this with. Obviously, I cannot match anything that's in it. Look, this is a little 30s print. There's some really cute ones in here. Every so often, I wish I was a fabric designer. I see these darling little prints on vintage quilts, and I think, I'd love to reproduce that. Eva says a dark brown. Eva, that's a really good idea, but you know what there's none of in my stash? That would be brown. I was trying to do reddish brown. I might have that, like a kind of muted, almost faded looking brown. A couple weeks ago, I was working on a tree skirt for one of our kids, and it had pine trees on it and little trunks.
And you should have seen me trying to find a brown to do a tree trunk this big. Yeah, it's pretty funny. I did eventually find some ombre confetti that had brownish colors. Yeah, we have another raw edge over here. Well, cross that bridge when we come to it, right? Dark green print. That I might have, and that might work. So across this bottom edge now, usually I would put my channel lock on and make a straight line, but I basically have to make a judgment call. Is it better to have a straight quilted line and have this border be much narrower, excuse me, on one side, or is it better to have the edge of my quilt not be straight, but have the border look basically even in width? And that's what I choose. So I'm not going to put my channel lock on. I'm just going to guide my machine as best I can, even though this border is not particularly straight. Oh, Eva, you're a lifesaver. Apparently she has some brown she'll loan me. Well, let me have. Loan won't do. It's just sell it to me. We can swap. So I'm just winging it across here. If you're not comfortable doing this, certainly you could use a ruler to do this. My line is not particularly straight. I'm just staying within a 1/4 inch, and that will all get covered up in my binding. When I am finished quilting, I always trim up my quilts with a long ruler and a rotary cutter, and so that's when I'll straighten the edge. It won't necessarily be parallel to the other edge, but it will be nice and straight. Oh, I'll take a question from Sheila. I'm going to get a tissue while I do this. Winter and my nose are not friends, I tell you. Usually just the top. Usually just the top because the batting doesn't have excess in it. Sometimes if the batting is cut really short, you can't help but grab the both, but generally I'm just trying to pull the top. Well, you know, that's a great idea. Do I have it? So basically what I'll do this afternoon is I'll pull out everything in my stash that's remotely like these shades of colors, and I'll just lay them beside one after another and see what looks most pleasing. And often that will have to do with color, probably less than actual print. All right, so once again, we're dealing with some more excess here, still trying to get this corner squinched up in, but that's quite manageable, I think. So here we go on our last pass. I'm just going to start on this side because it's where I am, and I don't think it's looking terribly directional, so it's my quilt. I get to choose. That's what I'm going to do. Sure, we'd love some music, Dave, while I quilt this last one. Oh,
This was the little 30s print that I think is so darling. Here again, I've got a whole bunch of, see if I can get to where you can see it. This is a completely raw edge here. There is fabric under it. It's been set on top of something else. So I'm just going to do my level best. It runs all the way along here for about 5 inches. I'm just going to do my best to stitch it down repeatedly and as best as I can reinforce that. Across. Oh, that did not work well at all, did it? Hang on, ladies. Well, you know, originally my intention for this live was to just do it and let you guys try and follow the thought processes, but sadly I'm a talker, so you get to hear me think out loud. My husband laughs at me because I am a hand talker. There is no Italian in me, but you would think so to watch me. And so he's forever telling me when we're taping, stop with winging the hands about, you know. So now he's saying to me, I can't be a hand talker when I'm quilting, which is true. Takes both hands to run this. So now I've come across it a few times. I'm going to stitch across one more time. Try not to catch that edge. There we go. So that's fairly well stitched down. Like I said, I don't feel like the lifespan of this quilt is going to be measured in centuries. It's not going to hold up to very many washings. But I think that whoever I give it to, it will be a person that I know will be okay with hand washing it, for example. And I think with hand washing and laying to dry, there's quite a few good years in this. So I think it's worth finishing. Okay, here's a funny one. Can you guys see this? This triangle right here is upside down, like the fabric is wrong side up. Who knew? Just proving that quilters forever have been making one mistake and leaving it in their quilt. Oh, there's pleats galore here. My goodness sakes. I'm making some kind of wonky shaped designs, but just getting her filled in. I'm sorry? There is some blue in the blocks, and you know, that is a consideration because my backing has the blue is, you know, very blue, obviously, right? And I hemmed and hawed over what backing to use because I didn't really have anything that I thought coordinated well either. But there is some blue in the blocks. In some of the earlier blocks, I think there was more. And I finally decided to go with the vintage because it has the right feel, I thought. That's going to be a challenge right there. Let's see what we can do here. So basically, come back tomorrow or check out my posts later today to see what kind of binding I chose. There's pleats everywhere there, and I just cannot help it. This block is pulled so askew. So we're just gonna go with the flow. So I am going to do one more quilt tomorrow, and that will be the last of kind of this series because we're all going to be heading into some New Year's celebration. And Friday I probably won't quilt. I know my husband can hardly believe it. For me to go 24 hours without quilting is quite unusual, but I promise I will take a holiday. Anyway, I would absolutely love feedback as to whether this has been helpful, whether, if there's something else you'd like to see in another short series like this. I know you've already given us some feedback in terms of camera angles, and we appreciate that. It's helpful to know that you like to hear me, thinking out loud through the quilting process, but I love feedback on all that kind of stuff because it helps me deliver what is helpful to you, which is my ultimate goal here. So, feedback is a wonderful thing. And just one last time, in case you haven't heard it in the earlier times or possibly are just popping in to this feed, this little series was intended as kind of an introduction to my masterclass, which is coming out in January, which is all about freehand and largely about edge-to-edge quilting like this, covering a quilt top with texture. But especially, it's about working freehand without preset designs or pre-marking, those sorts of things. So it's full of a wealth of designs, a wealth of tips, and I hope you're kind of getting a sampling of my teaching style while we've worked here this week. I am a talker, and I'm happy to share the things that I have learned, and I'm happy to learn from those of you who have already learned things that I don't yet know. So it is a collaborative process. I will take a question right now. Yes, I post pictures usually I post within Instagram, and it also shares them automatically to my Facebook page. Both of those are stitched by Susan. Yvonne, also love to hear your thinking process on choices that need to be made. Quilting design, respecting the character of the quilt, backing and binding choices, addressing problems and mistakes. Also helpful. I'm so glad. I'm so glad. I don't want to be nattering on when you all are sitting there thinking, I wish she'd just be quiet. So, okay. And by the way, my black kitty is, you can't see him in the screen, but he's just left me. He always is in this room when I'm quilting. He's so funny. I have unofficially dubbed him the quilt police because he's always present, always looking over my shoulder.
Okay. Another person saying they'd like to see the custom quilting. Good to know. We'll take the time to set up the cameras again and publish, when I'll be doing that, what times of day, and so forth. And once again, we are loading these onto YouTube. So the next day, each of these episodes becomes available on my YouTube channel, also called Stitched by Susan. And you can find them there and rewatch as often as you like. All right, off it comes. Well, thanks, Connie. Connie and I met each other in a sewing group, and we used to sew together in a church basement most Friday mornings. And boy, we have missed that during COVID. Betty, very great video series. I love hearing your thinking process. Thank you. Good. So don't stop talking. I thought you were going to say don't stop thinking. I won't do that either. I would think it's not easy to concentrate when you're trying to impart your thoughts to us. So thanks for doing this. Oh, Dave erased my comment. Hang on a sec. I won't let anybody into my quilting room when I'm working because I have to concentrate so much. I hear you. And I guess, Betty, I've done these particular designs so many times I've gotten past the point where I have to think too hard about them. Let me hoist this up. You'll see my trusty little selvage marking there. The one that I want to mend. I'm just going to go right in front of my face. There it is. So that's a little look at it. I will post pictures later today. And I may or may not get it bound today, but I will certainly trim it up and take some good pictures and post them today so you can see the finished product. So yay, one more job done. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back tomorrow, 9 a.m. PST. Same time, same place. So we'll see you then.